Welcome back from lunch. It's a good turnout for after the morning sessions. So this morning we did a analysis of the early results from the 14 test, and then the path document and the recommendation on ADCAN. Now this afternoon we're going to do a deep dive into the tests we have planned, and one test that's underway already in fiscal 15 that I think lays the groundwork that shows us how we truly are going to move through the path document to the decisions we have to make at the end of the fiscal year. So we'll have Jill O'Brien providing an overview of all of the testing activities we're doing, and then we'll jump into the address validation test, followed by discussions of the 2015 census site tests planned for a census day of April 1. So I'll turn it over to Jill.
Thank you, Barton. Good afternoon. I am Jill O'Brien, and I'm the testing coordinator for 2020. And what I would like to do is to give you an update, high-level update on these plans for 2015. So just to reiterate, when we met back in June, we talked about the proposed testing activities for 2015 census test. And to go over again at a high level, the purpose of the 2015 testing activities are to focus on the major design decisions, to re-engineer the roles, responsibility, and infrastructure for the field. We're going to test the feasibility of fully utilizing the advantages of planned automation and available real-time data to transform the efficiency and effectiveness of data collection operations. And we're looking to inform the performance of the methods and models that will help us develop the address list, test the use of aerial imagery for change detection, and assist in the delineation of the re-engineered address canvassing workloads. I showed you this graphic in June, but I wanted to note a couple of updates. Previously, we referred to our current address validation test as the math model validation test, the partial block canvassing test, and we've updated the name here. The actual test is the address validation test, where there's two components. One is the full block canvassing operations, which we've in previous presentations have talked about as the math model validation test. And the second component will be the partial block canvassing test, which Pat Cantwell and Mike Ratcliffe will address at the session following my remarks. We have kicked off, and I will give some updated information after I describe the other three high-level tests. Also, we have the 2015 census test, which has a planned census day of April 1st, and that is the test that we announced this morning. The site will be Maricopa. We're also going to have an optimizing and self-response test, which will also have a April 1st, 2015 census day, and that is the site where we will be utilizing Savannah and the surrounding counties in South Carolina. And then we're going to have the national content and self-response test with a planned census day of September 1st, 2015, and we should note that this test will not contribute to the design decisions. What did I do? So just to give you a high-level summary on the address validation test, this test is going to inform the performance of the methods and models that will help us to develop the address list. We're going to test the use of aerial imagery for change detection and implementation of partial block canvassing as an alternate for full block canvassing. And it's going to assist in the delineation of the re-engineered canvassing workloads. And as you heard this morning, we had a presentation regarding the re-engineered address canvassing, which talked about some of these initiatives as well. And the current status of the address validation test, we have a consolidated field test plan, which includes both parts. That's in a baseline. The full block canvas, we did receive OMB clearance on the 20th of August, and our field operations began on the 2nd of September this year. And I have updated statistics. As of yesterday, we had completed about 70% of the blocks canvassing. The partial block canvas, the OMB clearance is currently under review. And the field operations, I wanted to note a schedule change. We had originally planned to begin those operations on December 2nd, 2014, but we have pushed that back to 12/15/2014 for several reasons, which I believe Mike will talk about as well. And our operations are scheduled to end on January 15th. Okay, yes, sorry. So the 2015 Census Test summary. This test is where we're going to test the feasibility of fully utilizing field operations management system that leverages planned automation and available real-time data, as well as data households have already provided to the government to transform the efficiency and effectiveness of data collection operation. We will look to reduce NERFU workload and increase NERFU productivity with administrative records, field reengineering, and adaptive design. We will also look to test operational implementation of the bring your own device option for enumerators. The current status for this test: our Federal Register pre-submission notice was posted on September 2nd, 2014. The comment period closes on or about October 31st. It might go up to the 2nd of November, which I believe is a Sunday. Our OMB clearance package is currently undergoing internal review. Our high level, both our project and our capability requirements have been completed. Our low level solution requirements are under development. We have a field test plan that is in draft and is circulating for internal review. And as we stated earlier today, this is the Maricopa site, which we've already referenced, and we're going to have an April 1st Census Day. In the next 90 days, our goals are to submit the OMB package for clearance. We're going to have an integrated schedule completed and baselined. Our field test plan will also be completed and baselined. We will have the completion and baselining of the low-level solution requirements for the systems. And we'll also begin to prepare for user acceptance testing and systems readiness activities for our systems. And following Mike and Pat's update on the address validation test, there will be more discussion regarding the 2015 census test, and that will be from Melissa Therian and Stephanie Studs. Moving forward, I'll just give you some high-level information regarding the 2015 Optimizing Self-Response Test. The purpose is to conduct early research on the use of advertising, promotion, and outreach to engage and motivate respondents. We're going to determine the extent to which we will use early engagement, such as Notify Me. We're going to assess the operational feasibility of real-time non-ID processing and the potential resulting workloads for system development. And we'd like to test the extent to which encouraging responses without a census ID will contribute to the national self-response and internet response rates. The status of the test: our Federal Register pre-submission notice for this test was also posted on September 2nd. The comment period is expected to close around the 31st that weekend. Our full OMB package is going through an internal review process at the moment. Our field test plan has been baselined. The high-level project and capability requirements have been have been completed. Our low-level solution requirements are under development. Our site selection was announced earlier today. That will be the Savannah site. And again, we have an April 1st, 2015 planned Census Day. And the final update that you're going to get this afternoon from the staff will be from Jennifer Reichert, Evan Moffitt, and Stephen Buckner, where they're going to talk about more in depth on the specifics relating to this test. In the next 90 days, we will submit the OMB package for clearance. We will have an integrated schedule for this test, and it will be baselined. Our field test, our test plan has been baselined already. Our low-level solution requirements will be completed and baselined, and again, we will prepare for user acceptance testing and system readiness activities. I just wanted to give you some brief updates on the status of the 2015 National Content and Self-Response Test. This test is going to use a large nationally representative sample to ensure representation of race and ethnicity groups. The test will inform the language support plans and refine estimates of national self-response and internet response rates. Race and Hispanic origin testing will focus on separate versus combined question structures, as well as the inclusion of a category for Middle Eastern and North African. And the content re-interview will include a subsample of respondents to measure accuracy of race origin and household coverage. The status at this time is our test development is still in the initial planning and developmental stages. Our Federal Register pre-submission notice is currently undergoing the internal review process at Census. Our field test plan is under draft development. Our business process models are also under development. And we do have a planned September 1st, 2015 Census Day. In the next 90 days, we will submit our OMB clearance package for clearance. Our field test plan will be completed and baselined. Our business process models will be completed and baselined. Our requirements, project level and capability, will be completed and baselined. And our solutions requirements will be drafted. And our schedule, we expect to have the integrated project teams finalize their schedules, and then we expect to have the systems themselves finalize their schedules. One other thing that I would like to note is on Monday, we are going to have, October 6th, the Census Bureau is going to have the first 2020 census briefing, which is going to focus on the national content test. Information will be available on our website. It will be available by webcast, so I invite you to look there for the link to the information if you're not already aware of it. And that's all I have at this time.
Mike?
Thank you, Jill. Mike and I are happy to be here today, and we look forward to your questions and comments.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. This morning you heard Deirdre talk about the path of the design decision, and she mentioned address canvassing and reengineering. And she mentioned how the various activities would lead to that decision. And then Tim Traynor spoke about some of the work being done in the geographic area, dealing with addresses and data and other things. 6 months ago at a PMR, we talked about some of the statistical models that we've been working on. So I'm not going to cover some of the things you've already heard before. What we'll do is first, I'll just talk about our plan for address canvassing, some of what you saw this morning, just put in a little different package. And then I'll give you some information on the first part of the address validation test. This is what we've been calling the MAF model validation test. And then Michael's take most of the time. He'll talk about our geographic activities. This will include imagery-based analysis and how this leads to our partial block canvassing. And then I'll give information on part 2 of the address validation test. This is the partial block canvassing part. I think everybody here is familiar with these abbreviations, but because we revert to them so often, the master address file, or MAF, and the delivery sequence file, all of which have been discussed this morning a bit. And I put address canvassing here as well, because address canvassing is a procedure where we take a list, typically from a MAF extract, and we try to validate the addresses, update them, make additions, deletions as necessary. In the past, we've thought of this as an activity that's in the field shortly before the census. In this decade, we're talking about address canvassing during the decade, in office and in the field. So this morning you heard a lot of this. This is the way I think of it with the 6 steps of address canvassing. We start with over 11 million blocks. And for specific areas of the country, we want to be able to deal with these with alternative procedures. So this morning you heard about federal lands, national parks, national forests, military reservations. If we can get the information that we need from these, the list of addresses, and more important, the changes in those addresses, if we can get them from federal sources, this can be taken out of the in-field canvassing work. We also have many water blocks. We have, right now we are working on the blocks that will not be in the mail-out, mail-back operation. For this, we're thinking about a procedure which would combine a canvass, an update to the address list, and then an enumeration. And as was said this morning, there's no need to go out there twice to do the canvassing part of it. So if we can get 3 or 4 million blocks out of this first part where we can deal with them in a different way, then we're down to maybe 7, 8 million blocks. And this leads into steps 2 and 3, which are probably the critical ones here. In these steps, what we're trying to do is trying to develop for any particular area, perhaps a block, a score or a measure, maybe a probability of some kind of change that's happened out in the block that we haven't detected yet. And the idea is to try to assign some kind of score like this to all the blocks in the country. Now, the step 2, we deal with this in an automated fashion. Statistical modeling comes in here perfectly. Geographic activities, such as automated imagery and other activities, also can work here, and they can work together. The idea is to pair the list of blocks. Now, typically, what we expect to happen is that for some, there'll be a score which is very high. These blocks have to go to the field. In other scores where we're saying there's very little chance of any kind of change here, perhaps because this area is very stable or for other reasons. If we can knock off the top part and the bottom part, this lets us deal with the middle part. That's always the most difficult part, where the probability of something happening is in between. So we have higher chances of false negatives, false positives. If we can make this part manageable and send it to step 3, where we deal with the clerical work, the interactive work, where humans are intervening here. Machines can do things faster than the humans, but the people themselves can see some things that the imagery or the model can't pick up itself. So in step 3, we're doing a similar thing, but with human intervention here. And finally, we're left with which blocks need in-field work. Well, going to step 4, we've had a bunch of blocks, a list of blocks that we want to assign to the field. However, that's not the last step there, because we may have a cluster of blocks right here that are designated for the field. And there's another block 100 miles over here with a chance of some kind of change that we haven't detected. Do we want to go to that block 100 miles away if the chance is not that large, but it's above our threshold, where we may have some other blocks that are much closer, and maybe their score or probability of something happening is just below the threshold? So in step 4, we want to use operation and research types of procedures to try to make this more efficient, looking at the trade-offs between the quality and the cost of doing the canvassing. And finally, the 5th step. In the 5th step, we have a list of blocks that are going to the field for work, but do we have to send the entire block to the field? This is where partial block canvassing can come into play. And Mike will give you some examples of what we mean by this and how it might work. And step 6 is the in-field work. Now, during the decade, between now and perhaps 2019, the steps that we're dealing with, that we're applying for address canvassing can be very similar, but we have more options if we have more time before the end of the decade. So for instance, in the middle there, where we have to make those choices on the more difficult blocks or sets of blocks, we have more options at that time. For instance, perhaps we think there's a fairly good chance of something going on in a particular block or set of blocks, but maybe this is something where we can get an update from the DSF to give us more information. So in this case, we can monitor this block and wait till the next update from the U.S. Postal Service with the DSF and see if that's been captured. Same with other types of things. We may want to send a set of blocks or an area to the partners. This morning you saw the map that Tim put up about our partners. Full states in some cases, counties, tribal governments, others. If they can help us and provide updates to these sets of areas, then we don't have to send something to the field at that time. As we move closer to the end of the decade, there's less time, And then we're more into that binary decision, deal with it in the House or send it. So you saw this diagram this morning. This represents a depiction of our address canvassing. And we think of it as in-office work and in-field work. The in-office, the automated part, and the interactive or clerical part. The in-field part is partial block canvassing for those blocks where it might work. Otherwise, it's full block canvassing. And all of this goes together to update the Math Tiger database. So I'll just say a few words about the address validation tests. We're still in the very early stages. This started only a little more than a month ago. So the part one is full block canvassing. The purpose of this test is to validate the statistical models that we've been working with. So we want to assess these models in two particular areas. How well can they measure error in the math? And also, how well can they define the blocks that will be in the address canvassing infield work? Otherwise, which sets of blocks should go to the field, which sets of blocks don't need to go to the field. Part two, I'll leave that to Mike. Okay, for part one, the field implementation, we started just about a month ago, September 2nd. It's scheduled to run through December 18th, but as you just heard, even at this fairly early stage, we've already listed about 70% of the blocks. I don't want to say that those blocks are closed out. That's not the case for those blocks necessarily. And we have quality control procedures going on in the field right now. This sample itself contains just over 10,000 blocks, and this translates into about 1 million housing units. To take the sample, we stratified by the size of the block, and we did that because the size of the block is highly correlated with the chance of finding changes to the master address file. We oversampled the larger blocks in this drawing this sample. In the field, the listers have the list, an extract from the math, and from this, they're verifying the addresses on their list, making updates, adding addresses that should have been on there that they didn't find, weren't on the list, and deleting addresses that shouldn't have been there because they're not valid addresses or they're businesses, duplicates, or other things. And finally, for the analysis, I won't say much, but we will be comparing our predictions from the statistical models to the results in the field. So we're going to be taking our models, looking at, for instance, our estimates of errors in the math, estimates of ads that we would have captured if we had canvassed those blocks, deletes that we would have found, and seeing what is out there in the field. We're also doing predictions such as, for this 10,000 set of blocks, if that were our universe, which of those blocks would we go to if we were doing only partial in-field canvass? For instance, if it were 20% of the housing units, which blocks would make up those 20% in our sample? And we're looking at various models to see how this works. And I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, Pat. So I'll talk about some of the geographic activities, and just want to start by mentioning that the work that the geographers are doing, looking at imagery, comparing what they see in imagery to the math, and working with other geographical information, we're working very closely with the statisticians on Pat's staff, so working on the models. So the models are going to help inform the geographic activities. The geographic work will help inform the modeling activities. And there's already been quite a bit of interaction between the two groups, and that's going to continue through the decade as each area of expertise and information helps inform the other area in their work. So I'll talk about the imagery-based methods that we've used. We did do a pilot project this past spring, and these are helping. This work is integral. It's the in-office, or a portion of the in-office work that is a predecessor to the partial block canvassing work. So as we've said, the partial block canvassing is a component of the address validation test. And we're using imagery to detect where change has occurred and compare that change that we see in the imagery to information that we have in the master address file to understand where we are deficient in terms of the addresses and the numbers of housing units. In this So in this portion of the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about the imagery-based review, give you a feel for how, summarize some of the work we've done, give you a feel for how that works, and then we'll talk about the partial block canvassing test itself. So the imagery and the geographical work is part of a project that we referred to as the Targeted Address Canvassing Research Model and Area Classification Project, or TARMAC. That work closed out, that project itself closed out at the end of this past fiscal year, the end of September. That was primarily to help inform Geography Division's recommendation for re-engineered address canvassing. But we're continuing forward with the Tiger and MAF Assessment and Classification Project, and we're reusing that same acronym of TARMAC. So we liked that acronym and wanted to keep it. But this work is critical to establishing the in-office work and marshaling the use of geographical information to help inform the entire process. We'll identify geographic areas that are suitable for in-office canvassing, and then areas that need to be canvassed in the field. And again, as we've heard already, the focus is on decreasing the amount of area, the amount of housing units that we need to canvass in the field, and maximizing the number of housing units that we can manage in office through a variety of techniques. And also, as part of this project, part of our goal is to identify, obtain, and manage the variety of data necessary for this. It's not just imagery, but also a variety of other information about land use, land cover. So for instance, we're using the National Land Cover Database to help us identify different types of land uses, whatever they may be, agricultural, industrial, commercial, and so on, that help us understand what's on the ground, and then help us understand how things might change or might not change as we move through the decade. So as part of the, in the imagery review processes and the interactive review, and I'll mention in the work we did this past spring, it was all interactive review. We hope going forward through the decade to automate as much of the imagery-based review as we possibly can, and we're looking at different methodologies and techniques there. So we assessed the current imagery compared to 2010 vintage imagery to identify change. Where we could see change in those two vintages of images, and I'll show some examples as we move in later slides. We then assessed the current imagery in comparison to current housing unit information to identify coverage as well as geocoding issues. So housing unit counts, address counts from the master address file compared to what was on the ground visible in the imagery. We assessed the imagery and using parcel level data if we have that available, and we do have quite a bit of data for the country on parcel level information. And if you're not familiar with parcels, that's the land record, the land information about each unit of land, the property you own. If you own a house, that sits on a parcel, and the local governments record that information, and zoning may be included on it, and a variety of other information about that land area. So we're assessing imagery and parcel information to assess the likelihood of stability or future change, and especially in terms of stability, if we can establish that a census block is built out. So that means there's no more room for development, and there won't be any more development based on zoning classifications. That's useful information in helping us determine what kinds of, whether change might, or what kind of, how we might need to manage that block going through the decade. And then we'll also use imagery to identify obvious errors in our data, and we'll see some examples that we've picked up through the review. So this past spring, we reviewed imagery and information for 29 counties, and within those counties, about 22,000 blocks were reviewed. The counties were selected for a variety of characteristics. Some were partners in the GSSI, partners that had provided us with address lists. Others from our population estimates program and through other sources we knew had different rates of housing unit change. So some were slow growth, some were fast growth, and others in between. We selected counties. Some of the counties had blocks that are part of the 10,100 sample for the MAF model validation test. Others had a variety of special land uses, federal lands, military bases, variety of parks, prisons, and college campuses, and so forth. And then others were selected based on their urban, suburban, rural mixes. Some were entirely urban. For instance, the city of Baltimore was included. Others were predominantly rural, and we had others like Prince George's County that contained a mixture of along the urban to rural spectrum. And this map shows the distribution of counties. We wanted to have selections from distributed around the country, and again to try to capture a wide variety of land uses, development patterns, housing patterns, and so forth. So as part of the review, as I mentioned, we were looking for stability for whether areas were built out, and this provides us a nice example of a block, single-family homes, and as you can see, there's not much more room for development in that block. So as we look at that, at the imagery, look at at multiple vintages of imagery, if we establish there's been no change through that process, we compare the numbers of rooftops to the numbers of addresses that we have in the master address file. We can compare that to the number of housing units counted in the census and other information. We could establish, if all of that is consistent, then we can establish that this block is built out and put that into more of a passive monitoring category, identify a variety of events or characteristics that or triggers that might indicate to us if they occur, that we might need to look at that block, but if nothing triggers the review process, we can assume that this block is good and would not need to be canvassed in the field. And we can manage that in the office. In our review, about 69% of the blocks that reviewers looked at were built out. And this is if you think about the typical suburban neighborhood, it reaches a point where construction is complete and there's no more development, or there's very little development after that. Or older urban neighborhoods, there's not much more room to put new housing in a typical block in Washington, D.C., unless perhaps you tear down housing or go through a subdividing process. In this example, we can see this is an example of a block with a general data error that we picked up in our master address file to imagery review. The block that's circled has a count of 12 housing units according to the MAF. The 12 structures in that image are apartment buildings, clearly more than 12 units. There's 12 apartment buildings in that block. So we can pick up and detect these kinds of issues through our imagery review and then comparing to our data sources. And then determine the appropriate path for managing the corrections and the updates. For instance, if this was in an area with very good DSF coverage or a good local partner had an address file, we would attempt to obtain the necessary data through those means. By the end of the decade, if we still have not received corrected information, then we might need to go out we would need to go out into the field to collect that information if it's not coming in through other sources. In this example, I've included this. The older image is on the left, and in other slides, the older image will always be on the left, the older vintage. The newer vintage will always be on the right. In this example, we can see that in this block, there's a parking lot to the far left, in the far left side of that block, and then a building has been constructed at some point after 2010. From the air, we don't know what kind of building that is. We can't tell if that's a commercial office building or if it's a residential building or perhaps both. So we need to look, so the imagery review can't tell us everything we might need to know about what's on the ground, but it can provide the starting point for further investigation. We can look at other sources of data, administrative data, DSF, commercial data, other information to tell us what that structure might be, how many units there might be if there's residential uses within it, and then move from there. In our review this past spring of the blocks we looked at, oh, Chuck, we've lost the image again. So we're looking at the table here of observed change. About 82% of the blocks were stable. So when we compared the imagery, so comparing the two vintages of imagery and then looking at the counts of addresses in the master address file compared to what we see in the image, the blocks were stable. This is fairly typical of the landscape. A lot of stability, a lot of consistency out there on the ground. In about 6% of the blocks, we observed change, and that was evenly split between blocks where we where the change was tracked in the MAF, so 3% of those of the blocks, the change that we observed in the imagery is also reflected in the master address file, so we're keeping up to date. That was good. In another 3%, though, the change had not yet been tracked in the MAF. And one thing we need to understand is why that was the case. May be that we have not yet received information for those areas. It may be that the usual sources that we rely upon didn't contain information for those. So we need more investigation there to understand why, but that may be an indicator of areas that we would eventually have to go out into the field. And then 12% of the blocks, the master address file contained change, but no change was visible in imagery. And that may have been the result of geocoding errors that we've corrected since the census, or other corrections made to the MAF. So the MAF was improving in those cases. The imagery obviously didn't have any change because there had been no change, but the MAF was corrected since the census. Now, let's see, did I move forward? Oh, I think my slides are, my slides are out of order. Okay, let me go back. Here we go. My notes are out of order. Sorry, apologize. So now we're going to move on to partial block canvassing. So again, this is a component of the address validation test. As Jill said, the fieldwork is planned for December through January. We moved the date from December 2nd, the start date in the field from December 2nd to December 15th, because we've moved up the timing of a small field test for the LIMA. We're using the corporate listing and mapping application. We've moved up the timing on the small field test for the LIMA to October, November. That's a full systems test oriented on the partial block canvassing, and that will give us an opportunity to go out into the field with all of the functionality that we're planning, give it a test run, and then if there are any issues, correct those, adjudicate those issues before we go into production in December, and so mitigate any issues that might arise so that we don't have problems when we're in the field. We're going to choose, the plan is to choose, select 600 to 1,000 blocks for canvassing in the field. We're in process in selecting those blocks. We've identified about 400 so far that are good, suitable blocks for partial block canvassing where change is clustered. We're trying to those 400 are from within the 10,100 blocks that are part of the MAF model validation test. So we're going to review all of the 10,000 blocks using imagery analysis, and to the extent possible, conduct partial block canvassing or select as many as we can from within that 10,000. That will give us two sets of results from field work for those blocks. So you'll have the full canvas that's occurring now, and then you'll have the partial block canvas results later on, and then we can compare the results from both of those operations to see if the full canvas detected or found additional change that our imagery-based review did not detect. Imagery can't see what's under the roof, so if we're detecting basement apartments or other kinds of uses that we can't see in the imagery, but we're finding that in the full block canvas, that will be useful information. We'll utilize professional staff, so 25 to 30 professionals. So we're not hiring staff for this test. So we'll use headquarters and regional office geographers, primarily geographers, but any professionals that are interested in participating. And again, we'll use the corporate listing and mapping application. All right, so what kind of block is appropriate, or do we think is most suitable for partial block canvassing? So where we have clustered change, and change that has not yet been reflected in the master address file is the classic or the ideal approach. So here we see, again, the older image is on the left, newer on the right. We see a block, typical suburban block, and you can see that there's change in the upper right, new housing in the upper right portion of that block. If the MAF contains information for all of the existing houses, the ones that are in the older imagery, but not yet the newer ones, we don't need to canvass and validate what we already know to be correct. We'll just go out and collect the information that is needed to update the master address file. But not all blocks are suitable for partial block canvassing. In this case, we're looking at a suburban development, and as many developments go, Housing gets built as the lots get sold. The premium lots get sold first, or the most desirable lots are sold first and built on, and then everything fills in as the development process occurs. So in this sort of example, if you put this into partial block canvassing to pick up the units that were not reflected in the MAF, by the time you canvass to collect the new information, you've essentially canvassed the entire block. So this would not be suitable for partial block canvassing. We wouldn't save any money. There's no clustered approach here. So this is why we're seeing this as two methodologies that need to be implemented in the field, one full block and one partial block. So again, how are we selecting? I've kind of covered some of this information. How are the blocks selected? We're reviewing in-office. The in-office review is critical to identifying where partial block canvassing would be appropriate. It needs to be clustered. And again, just a note that what we're seeing from our reviews as we're going forward, both from the past spring and then as we've been reviewing the blocks from the math model validation sample, there's quite a bit of stability. Around 80% of the blocks that we're looking at are stable. Our test objectives, this is really to prove in and understand a methodology. It's more about understanding what we might encounter in the field, how we might set this up as a methodology, collecting the metrics, testing some assumptions on and new ideas in directing people to their work. So can somebody navigate to their assignment based on a written description or locational information? The assignment is along a street segment or between this intersection and that intersection or between two coordinates or two sets of addresses and so on and so on. Not our usual approach to assigning work. So that's part of the test. And we've done some testing in the field so far where we're understanding the kinds of ways that we need to describe the assignment to make it clearer to the worker. We'll collect information used as I mentioned before, to compare to the full block canvas. We'll collect the metrics related to efficiency, cost, and so on, and then also identify potential issues that we need to address as we develop this for a wider implementation or for non-professional staff and so on. And then to finish up with the analysis, as the results come back in, again, we'll work with the statisticians in comparing the results from the partial block canvassing and the math model validation test and produce a report discussing both. And our schedule is here. We're in the process of developing procedures and the various documentation, training materials for rolling this out before we go out into the field. And also continuing to work very closely with the staff developing the LEMA to make sure our requirements are included in the functionality that they develop. Thank you.
Before we move on to the next test, let's open this up for any questions or comments. Brian?
I had a question for Mike. Back on slide 18, where you've got some of the preliminary results from the address validation test. I appreciate you sharing these because, you know, hot off the press. I'm assuming, though, that this is kind of a preliminary look and that, or maybe I'm misinterpreting what this is.
Yeah.
Yes, I am. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, these are not from the address validation test. This is from the imagery review that we conducted last spring.
I'm sorry.
In the 29 counties.
Right. I'm sorry. I misstated that.
Yeah.
But let me clarify of what this is showing. So when you have the line here saying that you observed change in the imagery review and it was tracked in the math, that is nothing more than an indicator of change, not that it's necessarily the exact same change. So of the 3%, half of those could be, well, imagery found something changed here, but the math corrected something else in that block.
Well, we were looking
or
at...
is it really a housing unit?
Yes, it is a housing
level?
unit change. Yeah, it's
Okay.
housing unit level. So we had the map spots and we had the address information at hand. So we were looking at the addresses. We were looking at the changes that we were seeing. Now, what we did not do is look at the addresses associated. because we weren't going into the field, we weren't making a connection between the addresses on the houses that we were observing in imagery and the addresses that we have in the MAF. So at the address level, there may not be, we may be deficient still, but it's, in terms of the housing itself, we had matches.
Okay.
The numbers were correct.
Okay. But it seems to me then that we're missing lines here where there was some change was tracked in the, if this is a block level analysis, it would seem that there would be some blocks where there was a change in both, but it wasn't exactly the same change.
Yeah, we can't, yeah, that's missing from here. We don't have that, haven't gone to that level of detail yet. Yeah.
Okay.
Others? Trish?
The partial block canvassing is a big departure from the walking always to your right and all of that. So I hope that, and you alluded to this, like how are people interacting with Lima and their new instruction, or the instructions that are going to be developed by field and so on and training. I hope that the Bureau headquarters is planning to do a lot of observations in the field to see how people get confused. Because I know they get confused with 100% going straight around the block clockwise, right? So this is a change, and how is that going to be observed by headquarters?
Well, I can't answer that, how we're going to observe it in the future. I mean, what we will observe, we'll collect the information coming back from, and the qualitative information coming back from the professionals that are going out in the field this December. How well did they interact with the instructions? So the geographers doing the work in the office will be providing the descriptions for the assignment. We're also defining polygons that will be visible on the Lima, so in essence defining an assignment space that encompasses the area that they're going out to. We're going to need, but you're absolutely right, we will need to, as this moves forward, if this moves forward as a methodology, and that's part of the decision that needs to come out of the test this December, would we move forward with this as a methodology? It'll need more testing. So it may work well with professionals, with geographers, but it may need additional work and changes or honing to work with field staff. And you can kind of work through a progression. Permanent field staff, then how well will it work with someone that we hire and put through a training process? It might not be appropriate in that context. It may need to have somebody with more experience in working in the field, more of a spatial background. These are things that we hope to learn this winter as we conduct the test, and then as we move forward in thinking how would we design additional tests to get at those issues. We've already, a few of us have gone out. We did a small field test with the Lima this month, in September. I was out in the field last week with a colleague. We're designing the process. We're geographers. We found issues with our own instructions that we'd gone out with. So, this is all something that it's a learning process for us as well. We think we understand how best to describe the assignment. We go out and test it ourselves or have colleagues test what we've put together. They come back. We did the lessons learned yesterday, and earlier in the week. How do we need to craft that description? What kind of locational information will work best? What kinds of additional information do we need to provide to the person before they go out? How much prep time do they need to spend understanding their assignments, the full universe of assignments before they go out into the field? What order do they need to be placed in the Lima itself? So all of these things are going into the planning now we'll test this again in the October-November small field test, hone procedures again, and then go out in December and learn even more.
I've been wanting to ask a question about change detection. That was a term that was used last decade, and it pretty much didn't happen. and now we're hearing it again. You're presenting use of imagery and so on. Are you doing like a sweep of the entire nation in terms of changes? How do you, or are you relying on just changes that are reported through, you know, USPS address changes? Are you doing an imagery, somehow, some automated, obviously, review of the entire country? Because it's not just change detection of new things, it's also of old errors that I wonder if this would help with.
Yes, absolutely. The part of one of the main reasons for the work this past spring with the 29 counties was to set the stage, gather some metrics, get some understanding of procedures and sources to then fully implement a nationwide imagery-based review. So that's our plan going forward, to sweep the entire nation. And not just using imagery, and change detection is both trying to detect where change might occur and then detect where it has occurred. And so we're also looking for sources that tell us about change, development that's going to happen or is expected to happen. So looking at information that may help us from the developers or other sources that'll tell us where development is planned, what's expected in terms of the numbers of units to be developed, and then if we can get a sense of the temporal of the timeline for that as well, because that way we'll know, can help us know what to expect from our various sources. And then if we don't see those changes coming in, then to further query as to what might have happened. Did the change actually occur? There's a lot of change plan, development plan that never happens, but there's also development that does occur that doesn't end up on our sources. So knowing where things might take place is critical to the change detection process, and then obviously detecting where it has occurred and then finding the appropriate sources to use to update the information, whether it's in office or in the field.
I just wanted, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to follow on in recognition of the point that you raised about the fact that you heard about this before the last census. It didn't really go anywhere. You're hearing about it now. Where is it going? One thing that we haven't referenced is that Tim and Geography Division and Mike we've actually stood up a permanent staff dedicated to the work that Mike has been talking about, and our commitment to reengineering address canvassing. So I think we feel very confident that while we still have to determine the methodology and how we're going to be implementing it, which Tim told you about earlier will be happening during this next year, we're committed to what we're looking at doing. It's just the how and all the details that we have yet to work out.
So one of the things we've been doing, and Lisa's right, we have stood up a permanent staff, and that's that Tiger and MAF assessment and classification team. And they will be working on the imagery-based review for the entire nation, but also gathering in the National Land Cover Database, which we already had from our urban area delineations. The other thing we've been looking at is what information have we had in our geographic files in Tiger, in our geographic area information that can be utilized in other ways. So for instance, we have census tracts that are defined by local planners to encompass special kinds of uses, military bases, prisons, college campuses, CIA headquarters in Fairfax County is a census tract in and of itself, Dulles Airport. So we can utilize all of this information to understand what's on the ground and then make decisions as to what's the appropriate operation. You know, if we know that the local planners have defined a tract specifically for a prison, then that's good spatial information about the location of that group quarters. And we know that we've gone through a process already to verify that those tracts that they tell us are contain those kinds of uses actually do. We used imagery in that regard to verify. We've also delineated boundaries for prisons, college campuses, and so on. Even when they weren't covering the entirety of a tract or the entirety of a block group, we now have the boundaries for those uses in our system. And we can use that to help us classify the landscape and then re-engineer the address canvassing operations.
Ty?
Yeah, thanks. Yet another one of these areas of research that sounds very, very interesting. It sounds cool to be working with. So, thanks for sharing on this. I thought Trish's question almost made mine go away, but let me just ask it anyway. The precursor. Every method's going to have noise, and every method's going to actually have blind spots, more like a bias type thing. And I guess what was behind my question is, where you'll rely on modeling primarily versus where you'll rely on an imagery review primarily, or whether the imagery review is going to be automated primarily versus clerical primarily. You know, if push comes to shove, and everything's not going to get treated exactly the same. So is either the test that you're doing now or the tests that are on the books going to be focused and structured in a way that helps you identify where those holes are? So less of a modeling versus imagery kind of test, but more of a, you know, where are those blind spots? Because, you know, when you do have them, there's types of housing, maybe they're correlated with sociodemographics, maybe they're not, but, you know, it can matter there. So just.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, you know, imagery can't tell us what's under the rooftop. So where you have commercial to residential change in the downtowns of cities, you know, we know that's happening in DC, it's happening in Baltimore and other cities around the country. Imagery may not necessarily help us understand what kind of change is occurring there, but the models may, and looking in pulling together a variety of other information, they may help point us in that direction to the changes there, or other other sources of information that are non-imagery based can point us there. So, and I'll let Pat answer too.
Sure, and from the statistical models part of it, in our sample, the sample that we're taking for the first part, the MAF model validation part of the address validation test, we took a sample of all the blocks in the country. It's representative, although it doesn't include Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and many of the federal lands. But we sampled from all the different strata of blocks, so that we have cases where we expected a large number of errors, but other cases where we expected little or no error. So otherwise, we're trying to look at all four parts of it. Otherwise, where we expected to see much, and we're going to see it, and we're going to see where did we miss, where we expected a lot, but there was nothing there, plus the other way. So we're looking at, and we'll be looking at these false negatives, if you want to call them that, and false positives, and trying to associate them, if we can, with specific types of terrain, other characteristics, whether it's socio-demographic, but probably more likely geographic.
So if we think about the kind of the iterative process of the two groups working together, the modelers will come up with their predictions as to where change may occur. Maybe we test some of that in the field. We find out that it wasn't, for some blocks, it wasn't correct. We then go back to the imagery and other geographical information to help us understand what's the context for that block, what other kinds of information might we have used to help inform the models, acquire that, compile that information, feed it back into the models, see how the models perform, and keep moving back and forth. But you know, there will be areas where the models will perform better than the imagery, and because imagery can't detect the changes, there'll be other areas where the imagery, we may find that imagery is better than the modeling because of the nature of the change that's occurring.
Is there literature out there or some experiences that have wrestled with this that already have some priors on what your modeling is or not going to have in blind spots versus the imagery? I mean, that you can actually get some data on with the testing that you're doing? As opposed to like trying to wrestle with all the hypotheses yourself, you know, and figuring it out.
Well, we've had some initial discussions with, in terms of automated change detection and imagery extraction, we've talked with folks at Oak Ridge National Labs. They had used some of our data from 2000. We had compiled a list of blocks that had 10 or more trailers observed in address canvassing, mobile homes, trailers. They used that, so we provided them with the blocks that contained 10 or more. They used that to calibrate their automated extraction process. They're going to give us then the file of blocks. As they run that imagery extraction every year, they'll provide us with the information, the list of blocks that contain trailer parks, mobile homes. We can use that then in the modeling process as well. We can also, we'll continue discussions with them as to what kind of modeling they've used before to help us help inform our thinking.
Sure, and also these tests are building on research that's already been done. A lot of it done on work from the 2010 census and the address canvassing results. So back in 2009, we have results, everything from the canvassing. Not that every particular case was done exactly perfectly. In fact, in some cases, we're looking at results as we saw following from the coverage measurement survey, and we had some follow-up. But from this, we've seen a lot of the characteristics that that were common among the cases that had problems, and we used those in models that we built back from the 2009 data. What we've been doing since then is we're trying to use additional variables, such as mainly those that have to do with geography, such as some of the things that Mike was talking about. Variables indicating stability, something that's built out, or has it been changed nearby? And we're working on getting those files together. We think they'll be good predictors, and we hope they'll be making the statistical models tighter.
What path?
Tom Lewis, just a quick comment. I think it's implicit, but I want to make it explicit that it's not an either-or between the models and the images, that they will inform each other and iterate to be better, but in the end, it's the combination of the image and the predictions from the model that can be used to make decisions on canvassing. It's not an either-or kind of thing.
What path does the in-field technology, what are you envisioning for that? The canvassers, what are you envisioning? Right now it's Lima. Is that that you're going to be using? Is that going to?
Yes, that's what we're envisioning now. I mean, whatever the corporate listing application is what we're envisioning using. So yeah, the Lima at this time going forward.
Yeah, as Mike said, I mean, we've done a lot of work to ensure that as Lima moves forward, the requirements that they're working off of are the 2020 requirements. And I think that one of the advantages of getting this partial block canvassing and change detection test in the field, so this as a part of this test, is it ramps up that process of ensuring that the requirements are fulfilling 2020 requirements. And Mike made reference to that earlier.
Yeah, and the Lima staff have been extremely helpful and responsive. This is, the partial block canvassing came about in a very short amount of time. We've been working on it only since May, and so they've incorporated our requirements into their designs to make sure that we have successful, we have appropriate functionality and successful functionality for December.
What would you say is the biggest one or two requirements that ripple through the most in the current Lima software?
Well, I'm not familiar with all of the Lima software, so I really can't answer that. I mean, I've really only been using it, and I've used it once for this partial block canvassing small field test. So, I mean, as far as us, for our use, it was the ability to note the location of a housing unit, to note the kind of change.
Tim?
So what I would say is that one of the most important requirements for the Lima as it made its way forward was to have a standard set of requirements for all the different census and survey work. So the goal there was to take all of the different activities that one would engage in and the different census and survey activities within the Bureau for listing purposes, and we brought all of those folks together and we worked through very detailed requirements and got consensus on a set of core requirements that would be used in all census and survey work so that the basic requirements would be the same. This is not something that we've done in the past, and this is something that we realized had to be done in the future. Now, there may be some very special characteristics that are required for different operations even within the census. So in some cases, you're doing a canvassing where you go around the block, and in other cases, you may actually be going to specific housing units within that block. And so maybe those requirements differentiate a little bit, but the core set of requirements are the same. So I think that was the biggest factor moving forward with determining requirements for the corporate listing and mapping instrument.
Any others? Okay, let's move on. Let's now take a look at what we can now call the Maricopa test, and the work we'll be doing around NERFU in that test. Melissa Therian and then Stephanie Stutz.
Hi, how are you? So I'm here to tell you a little bit more about the plans for the 2015 census test. As you've heard multiple times already, it's going to be in Maricopa County. This test will be similar in many ways to the 2014 census test, so some of the parts I might go over a little bit more quickly than others because you kind of heard some of it this morning when Eli was describing the 2014 census test. As Jill told you earlier, we're really planning for this test to focus on the planned automation, the real-time data that we get out of the field, and data that households have already given us through administrative records, and to improve our efficiency and effectiveness in the field during NRFU. We want to focus mostly on reducing the NRFU workload and increasing the productivity of the enumerators, and Steph will talk more about that later when she gets into the field reengineering portions. For administrative records, this has not really changed much since the 2014 test. We're going to be evaluating using real-time data through leveraging mail delivery information from the USPS to help determine occupancy status of households. And we're going to try we planned on trying to replicate what we would see in the 2020 census using an April 1 census date. But we thought maybe we might be getting the most up-to-date IRS tax records in this test, but unfortunately we won't be. So we're going to be planning on trying to figure that out for the future testing. But this year we'll be getting 2013 tax records to rely on. And so we're figuring out right now how to use tax records and the information that we have in the best way for the 2015 census test. We, again, are going to use it to determine the occupancy status of the housing unit and the characteristics of the people living in the housing units. So where we're doing more work for this test is in the adaptive design. We had one method in the 2013 census test, and after the 2013 census test, we learned some lessons, and we went forward with the 2014 census test, and now that we're seeing the results from that test, we're learning more lessons. So one of the things that is staying the same, that we're still going to conduct up to 3 personal visits before using a proxy. But now we're going to, in essence, float the maximum number of visits determined for each housing unit using real-time stopping rules. So these stopping rules are going to factor in the completeness of data that we're getting in geographic areas in the field real-time. We're going to be looking at the stability of that data over time and more attempts that come in for each case. And we're going to be benchmarking it against other sources, such as the ACS. So what this means, in essence, is every day that we get data in during NRFU, we're going to be looking at that data. We're going to be looking at what the imputation rates by certain geographic areas might be. And we're going to be using that information to help us determine, do we need to keep going back to this area, or do we have enough information from this area to stop? So we're looking at that right now. We're still in development. We don't really have one set way that we're planning on doing it, but we're definitely looking at different options. One of the reasons why this might be a little bit more interesting is because in the 2014 census test and in the 2013 census test, we have obviously been noticing that enumerators are having a hard time following instructions on recording contact attempts. And so we're managing contact attempts and trying to use a maximum number of contact attempts based on enumerator information is a little bit difficult. So we're trying to look at different ways in which we can determine when we're done with NRFU. Okay. So a little bit more about the actual design of the panels for the census test. We will have we've planned for about 60,000 non-responding cases. These will be equally distributed between 3 different panels. One would be the control panel, and we'll have 2 experimental panels. And in the 2 experimental panels, the adaptive design and administrative record treatments will be applied. Whereas in the control panel, the field procedures, again, will be similar to the 2010 census. The major differences would be, again, that we're using an automated data collection instrument, and we will be doing some different onboarding than we have in the past. We're going to be contracting it out, hopefully, and having a third party help us out with the onboarding. We don't expect that'll affect at all the NRFU process in the field, but it's still a difference from 2010. Again, we'll be, right now the current plan is to do a maximum of 3 personal visits and up to 6 total contacts if we can identify a phone number. We're no longer planning on giving phone numbers to the enumerators in the field, so we will rely on them if they find one, from a building manager or from a for sale or for rent sign. And we will do a proxy after the 3rd attempt. This panel will use the same operational control system as we used in the 2014 census test. So as Deirdre mentioned earlier today, we have a full administrative records removal approach. This will be our second panel. It will implement the adaptive design contact strategy that we're developing right now based on staffing roles. It removes unoccupied and occupied housing units from the NRFU workload before we make any contact attempts. And it will employ the new operational control system that Steph will tell you about in a few minutes that her team's been developing. So you've probably seen this a few times, but we'll go over it really quickly. We have the NRFU housing units. We use the administrative records to determine which cases can be removed, and then we conduct contacts on the remaining cases, and we have some that are resolved and some that are left unresolved. And part of that was what you heard this morning with Eli, the non-interviews. So we'll have to pay close attention to that going into 2015. Okay, and the third panel is what we refer to as the hybrid administrative records removal panel. We're going to be implementing, again, the same adaptive design contact strategy as in the other panel. This panel will remove only the unoccupied housing units from the workload prior to conducting any contact attempts. Then we'll conduct one contact attempt without proxies. And then with all cases that are remaining, if we have administrative records, we'll remove the occupied housing units from the workload after that one visit. And again, this panel will employ the operational control system being developed by Rocket. So here is a graphic just walking you through, again, the panel design. Start with the NRFU housing units. Use administrative records to determine vacant, attempt one contact. You have resolved and unresolved. For the unresolved, to use administrative records to determine occupied units. And for all the remaining cases, you conduct additional visits. So this is new for the 2015 census test. What we're going to be doing is an evaluation follow-up, and the focus of this follow-up is to get a better sense of the quality of the administrative records that we're employing in the census test. We expect to follow up on about approximately 5,000 cases where the census test NRFU responses, information from the census test NRFU responses, didn't match the administrative records information that we have. So these would be the, part of the unresolved cases that we want to learn more about to learn how we can maybe improve our administrative records uses going forward. So some of these cases are where we have housing unit status disagreements. So the unit is vacant. We go out in NRFU and we find that the unit is vacant, but the administrative records might have told us that it was occupied. So we want to go out and follow up on those cases. And the opposite, where we find it occupied in NRFU, but the administrative records told us that it was vacant. So what we're trying to do there is collect the timing of vacancy to understand if between the time that we would have an administrative record, where it might have been filed and reported earlier in the year, and the NRFU date, which is later than census day, obviously, there's a couple months in between where, you could have people that are moving. So we're trying to get a sense of if these are recent moves, or maybe we're just not capturing it correctly. Okay, so we have another set of cases, which is where we have population count disagreements. So these are units that are occupied in both NRFU and the administrative records, but we have different population counts. So what we're going to do is we're going to go out, we're going to try to get the most accurate roster we can for the April 1 date, and then we're going to see which roster matches better, the NRFU roster or the administrative record roster. And the last type of cases that we're going to be following up on, these actually don't rely on the NRFU results, but these are where we have administrative records where the most current year that we have and the most previous year that we have before that, their rosters are different. So we want to try to get a sense of where you have administrative records where the rosters are changing from year to year. Is there something we can find out about those units? So we'll collect the most accurate roster that we can for April 1 and try to evaluate what we're seeing in the administrative records for the two different years. And so that's, in essence, what we're doing. Okay, so I think we're passing off to Steph.
Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie Studs, and I'm here to share with you the next segment of our rocket, which is Reorganized Census with Integrated Technology Journey. So I'm very excited to be here today. And what I'm going to share with you first is just we've really broken the rocket segment down into 3 core pieces. Our planning, which I shared with you during the last PMR. And really what that was the team came together on April 1st of this year. We were able to do our concept of operations and really come together with what we were going to be doing. And just to take a step back and refresh everybody's memory about what came through during that time frame was really our goal was to increase NRFU productivity by 20%. Also provide some key indicators for the cost parameters as we move towards 2020, as well as coming forward with what the buy versus build decisions could also be for 2020. So the team took a step back during this planning phase, and we took a look at aligning ourselves with the 2020 vision and also the assumptions, things that people were already actively working on. And then the team said, let's develop our plan from that. In order to get to that 20% that John set out there for us, we had to come up with a plan of how we were going to get there. So today, what you're going to begin to see is that implementation of these things. The enhanced operational control system, which many of you have already heard of as MOJO. Automated training, truly moving away from verbatim. Automation of payroll in the field, no longer doing paper payroll. Near real-time reporting, coming back to our operational control centers where we can do management and intervention if needed or making decisions on the fly. Our new field structure, because with all the automation that's coming through with our handheld device Compass and then an enhanced operational control center, there's no purpose in using the same management structure we used in the past for paper-based processing. This new field structure is going to show new ratios. In 2010, there were 5 management tiers. We are down to 3, moving towards that 2020 vision. So today what I'm excited to really get to share with you is where we really are in the process. So I'm excited because we've moved from planning, which is always critical and important, to what the team likes to do the most, which is do. So that's what I'm here to share with you today. So our rocket journey, as I said, in the implementation core, what we've done is we've looked at 3 key pieces. We're in creation mode where we've built our operational control system, also known as MOJO, which I will share in great detail with you in just a moment. Our core automated training and our operational control centers. This is where the data will come back from the handheld device and provide near real-time information for monitoring and also decision making. Also, you'll see off in the little cloud, if you remember from our concept of operations, we also had a little cloud. During planning and implementation, some core things arose that we used the decennial policy team for, and that was legal, our staffing, and our policy making. So coming forward with an idea that the Rocket team has come forward with obviously has some ramifications in HRD, creating new job positions, pay scales. It also comes up with how do we do these new things in the field. And what we wanted to do early and often was engage policy, involve HRD, and our legal department. All of them have helped us tremendously as we've been going through this process. We truly started implementation in July of this year, and during this process, as I said, we've created these items, and what we're really striving towards as our next goal is November. And I'm going to talk about our CIMEX that we're doing with MITRE, which is actually what I like to call our true dry run before 2015 production. And then as we come out of the simulation in November, this gives us an opportunity to take a step back. We're going to refine MOJO. Our operational control system. We'll also refine automated training, and we'll have an opportunity to refine, if needed, our operational control centers. So I'll show you those in just a minute. So MOJO. MOJO is our operational control system. It is not an acronym. It's just the name that the team provided for the system. It has 3 key components inside of it: the optimizer, our management report capabilities, and all of our external system interfaces. I think it's important to point out again that Tom Cook gave us a really good piece of advice very early on: walk, don't run. Even if you have the ability to do things, don't do them all at one time, or you won't be able to sort out what went really, really well and what didn't go as well. So the team has taken that very much to heart. So what we're doing is optimizing our case attempts and our routes using the optimizer, which is the orange side right here on the left. For our optimizer, we're currently using the Esri Network Analyst module with routing and shortest path functionality. We're collaborating a lot with external industry and academia sources, as well as working with capstone projects. We're currently engaged with Carnegie Mellon to deliver some traffic functionality through their civil engineering department in December. The other thing that's critical to understand in our optimizer is that this is an ongoing and very agile process. So the optimizer is here and it's on board, but one of the key things we've done is we've actually built in our own constructive simulation. So as we've gone through this process, we have to test the optimizer, we have to test our business rules and our functionality. The key thing we want to be able to use in SimX as well as during our testing is simulated data, or what we like to call synthetic data. Synthetic data is supposed to be the closest thing we can get to real data without it being titled. So within our team, one of our mathematical statisticians took it and actually came up with a way to do this based on the research triangle methodology, working with MITRE. And what we have is the ability now to do constructive simulation for a rocket that allows for us to really have a three-tiered or a three-hierarchical approach. What we've got in there in this 3 dimensions is the household, the enumerator, and our case optimizer, or better known as time data. And what we're doing is using that as we're running our business rules and actually refining our process as we go into SimX and into production. And what it's allowing us to do is be predictive. It's allowing us to perform impact analysis prior to going to the field. It's also letting us change our cost parameters, our case workload, test our best time to contact strategies, and most important, it's allowing us to align with UPS and other external entities to do predictive type modeling for operations and process. One of the key things we've learned from academia and industry and reaching out to them in this 6 months that we've been actively working is that it's important to make sure our process works before we add an optimizer to it. So that's been core and critical as we've moved through this process. The next key thing to mention is our report functionality. Mojo has a core set of reports for our field managers of operation as well as our local supervisors of operation. We are managing red. That is the simplest part to really bring this to fruition. And what is manage red? I don't want an LSO walking around with an iPad or a tablet looking at reports. They are not data miners. In a 6-week operation, which is core and critical, is that I can quickly identify the problem areas, whether they be performance, whether they be quality, or whether they be something specific in the field, and I need to address them immediately. So what we've done is built a set of reports and alerts. Those alerts go directly to their device. So as a local supervisor of operation, I'm getting my red alerts. So imagine if you could pick up your BlackBerry or your iPhone every morning and not have to go through 300 email messages, and right at the top somebody said, these are the top 10 things you need to address today. That is the core of what Mojo's going after. How do I manage all these red alerts? And so we can quickly identify them, we can quickly illustrate them and send them out to the LSOs. They don't have to mine the data. The data is there under the scenes if it's needed, but what we really want them to do is manage those quick, fast strike, performance, quality, payroll, whatever those issues are. So this has been done in very much a quick and agile methodology, I would say very agile. And the important part is to address and communicate with the field staff very frequently, and we've done, I think, a pretty good job of that. Wayne Hatcher has allowed us that closeness and proximity to the field staff. As I mentioned to you all in the last PMR, we had this huge opportunity to go to Atlanta. We, the Rocket team, did not share our ideas for what this would look like. We showed them Compass and the ideas of Mojo on a PowerPoint slide and said, in the field, if I were to give you this technology today, how would you manage from it? And what we came to the conclusion at the end of day 1 was how close the field staff came to looking very much like what the Rocket team had put together. And the exciting part was each and every one of those team members left the room that night, came back with their homework for the next day, and there was not enough white space in that room for them to continue to draw on the boards that day. We left that session, came back, and really started the build on Mojo. We took it to Denver during the summertime, and we had a skeletal system. We showed it to a core group from all the regional offices in Denver. We brought them all there. Some had experience in 2010, some of them did not. A lot of them have current surveys experience at all different entities in the organization. So we had field representatives, we had supervisors. The cool part of this was they really took to heart the system. And our team, as the field staff were talking, we were quickly taking down all these things they thought we needed. What we did was we came back, we basically went through the list and said, prioritize high, medium, low. And that's what we did. In an 8-week sprint, we were able to do all the highs and the mediums, integrate those to Mojo. And about 2 weeks ago, we took that to New York, brought back the same 20-some-odd staff to New York, had the ability to release Mojo yet again for them to see. They were amazed at how well all of the things they had asked for had come into play. They were really comfortable with what they saw, and of course came out with some more refinements they'd like us to make. So what we did coming into our simulation in November, we came back and said, what are the critical items we must have moving into this simulation? We've integrated all of that, and as of Tuesday, we've frozen that system and ready for simulation. Last but not least is our external system interfaces. Mojo will, in 2015, integrate with 6 external facing systems throughout the Bureau. The ISACDs have all been drafted at this point. We're waiting to finalize the output record layouts or the file layouts at this point. But the critical thing is we've already begun the integration with those external facing systems. Next is automated training, and I'm really excited because at the end I'm going to get to show you guys a 2-minute video. We've done our audition for our actors to do our moving away from verbatim training. So I'm going to show you a short clip. It's really exciting because Jenny Kim, who's leading our training team, has had the opportunity. They've picked the actors, and we're actually going in the field to do all of our taping next week, or beginning to, but I'll get to show you a 2-minute segment. Keeping in mind, as we talked to during the concept of operations, our FMO, our LSO, and our enumerators are all going to take online training. The important piece of this is we've begun the creation of the curriculum. We're building our multimedia content with a vendor that will contain videos, multimedia pieces, and narration. And then the final pieces, we'll be delivering that to the Commerce Learning Center. So just as all of us take our training via CLC, that's how these individuals will also take it. We brought on interns from the University of Maryland's education program. They're all master's and PhD students. They've really helped us begin to blend a learning method to administer our training and how to storyboard and really move in that direction. So this wasn't just the Rocket team sitting in a room going, how do you think we should train? We actually reached out and brought in some, they're just really, really stellar interns from the University of Maryland. We will also, in our training that you're seeing here for the first time in 2015, we will release our training not only online, but our one-day touch point will invoke master trainers. So we won't be just using someone that we bring in to train as potentially an enumerator or an LSO, select them to be the person that does the training. This time we will be using our master trainers. It's important to note that the enumerators will do all their training approximately 8 to 10 hours online. We're looking at approximately 16 modules, give or take. Those will all be video segments that they'll have the ability to play back via computer or their device throughout the rendition of their work in the field. So it's kind of like me. If I have a moment and I can't remember how to do something on a device or my iPhone or an appliance, I can quickly go to YouTube, bring it up, and execute it. So that's the capability we want to give these individuals. Our LSO will take the enumerator training plus their training, and they'll learn Mojo as well. And then finally, the FMO will take the enumerator training, the LSO training, and learn how to use Mojo. Because it's kind of hard to be a supervisor in the mainstream of things if you don't know what's being expected or how the enumerators are being trained. So we want that to be a congealed process. Next is our operational control centers. So there will be 2 operational control centers during the 2015 test. One of these will be here at headquarters. The other one will be in Denver. Although the test is taking place in Maricopa, we will be managing field operations from the Denver regional office. This gets us closer to that model we're looking to do for 2020. It's important to note we have done this as a mobile configuration so we can move it as needed. All of the configuration is complete at this point. All the acquisition is done for the one here at headquarters as well as the one in Denver. The equipment has arrived here at HQ for the most part, and we begin construction next Tuesday. Our SimX. So as I said, the simulation is important, in my opinion, to the overall success of the project. So we have teamed up with MITRE to do what we're considering human in the loop. So MITRE's worked with other DoD agencies. So in the event of a terrorist attack, how do people react? So it's a simulation of how in large-scale operations, how do you react? Making sure that you can do the things that are required of you when these types of things occur. So we're basically using a combination of scenarios that was put together from the field. So we met with the field in Denver. We came up with approximately 84 real-life scenarios. We have developed with MITRE not only the content for the scenarios, but how often we will send those through the simulation so that we can react to those, as well as the synthetic data. Take a step back to a moment when I mentioned Rocket has a constructive simulation. When you're doing a simulation, imagine in November, the operational control center's up, our FMOs and our LSOs, all of our management structure is sitting in front of these. This will look just like it will in Denver in 2015 and just like it will here at HQ. What MITRE will do is facilitate sending scenarios through that pipe to us. The data had to be constructed, however, in this simulation module to be able to allow us to act out these scenarios just as we would in the field. So when we call up a scenario, it's not just about reading off a script as an enumerator or as a manager. We have to have the data to fill Mojo because they will actually be fulfilling the jobs just as they would in 2015. And what does this give us the core capability to do? It gives us the core capability to understand, do our staffing ratios work? Because what we've been told so far by the field is they believe they can manage somewhere between 15 and 30 enumerators versus the 8 to 10 they were able to manage in the past. Why is that? It's automation. But we want to get a good feel for what that real ratio is. This gives us that core capability. In recruiting for the SimX, what it's allowed us to do is reach out to the field. So we're using approximately 100 people for this simulation. Many of them will be in the field, working from their homes, just as they would in production. All 6 regional offices are engaged. They have provided staff from either the current surveys or people who worked in 2010 to be the roles of enumerators, LSOs, FMOs. So that entire structure is coming from the field. We've also engaged the decennial directorate as well as the field directorate to provide individuals to also interact. So we get yet another kind of view on how this whole simulation is going to be done and anything they might see as things we would need to address prior to going to production in 2015. So there will be about 100 people interacting. We've recruited those, and we are well on our way to preparing devices for delivery, training, and things of that nature. The infrastructure build-out here at headquarters is ongoing. As I said, we've got all the equipment. We're beginning our build on Tuesday in the Center for Applied Technologies right down the hall here on the main level. That's where the SimX will be. We've also have all of our servers, all of our infrastructure is set and ready to go. We're already using that infrastructure here. And finally, as I mentioned, our synthetic data. The Rocket constructive simulation that we've worked very closely with our mathematical statisticians here and MITRE to create is unique in that it's three-dimensional. There was not a model like that here prior to this. And the model creating this data is core to the success of this actual simulation. So we could all sit in a room and act out our roles, but we need that core data to look and feel like Maricopa County in 2015 so that Mojo can ingest what's being simulated coming back from a Compass device and answering a phone call from an LSO and looking at heat maps and seeing where we have not moved enumerators into specific areas and how we'll manually intervene to fix those types of issues. So this is core in us moving forward. To me, this is truly my dry run before we hit 2015 production. So in November, they will have a week of training. They will have classroom training, which we're doing via virtual teleconference the 10th and the 12th of that week. We will do all of their training via virtual teleconference. I'm not going to bring everyone into the field here in HQ for a day or two and then send them back. So this will give us an opportunity to evaluate how well this training is going to work at a distance. That Thursday and Friday, we will dry run with MITRE some of the simulation scenarios. And then the week of the 17th to the 21st, we will run 8 runs of a simulation here at headquarters with the MITRE white cell. And this will be able to give us that ability to see, you know, where can we refine? If you remember back to the slide I showed a few minutes ago, how critical refinement's going to be. So I feel as though at the end of every day when we're doing these debriefing sessions, I'll have a very good idea of where my operational control centers need to be adjusted, where our Mojo system would need adjustment and refinement, as well as the automated training. To touch on the training for just a moment more, we plan to take, after the simulation is over, the first 8 modules, or 9 modules, I apologize, to Chicago Regional Office to share with them the video components of those first 9. And then after all of our SimX and our dry runs, and that's finished, that'll give us an opportunity to, again, with the refinement of Mojo and the training, then take it to LA in February. So at that point, we've taken a pretty strong approach in engaging field and getting their feedback prior to us releasing this in Maricopa for May 18th as our start date. Finally, some of our key milestone dates. The green to the left are completed at this point. My big upcoming deadlines, as I said, our next eye on the prize is going to be the SimX in November. Completion of all the online training modules and getting them on the Commerce Learning Center. Training our field staff, the LSOs and the FMOs. Releasing the final piece of Mojo. In the March-April timeframe for production, getting our operational control center here set up as the one in Maricopa, and then finally be able to answer all of the analysis questions and providing the data that the Decennial Directorate requires in order to make buy versus build and those analysis decisions that were core to the project. To bring us back to the eye on the prize, I know you all have seen this slide before, but it's very important, and we have one person in the team who's very strong about always bringing us back to, that's a really great idea, but not now. So it's important that at the end of the test, I be able to report back from a team's perspective, did we meet the 20% increase in productivity for the enumerators? Did we decrease our miles per case? As many of you heard last time, we traveled the United States 9 times over in 2010. Can we decrease that? Decrease in the total hours spent. With the automation of payroll and not having to meet at McDonald's every morning for that cup of coffee and turning in my payroll and getting my work assignments, can we get that? And then, of course, importantly, is we have completely changed the field structure to kind of embrace this automation with new staffing ratios, a new structure, less management overhead. We want to make sure that that was accurate, and if it needs to be refined coming out of production, that we can do that. And then last but not least, we have a lot of performance indicators built into Mojo. For the enumerators, for the LSOs, did we get those right? Do we need to tweak those getting into 2016? For production, did our automated training deliver? Where do we need to refine it going into 2016? And of course, most importantly, the foundation of where we are is the quality metrics, ensuring that we don't in any way, shape, or form, with all the automation and all the new items we're performing here, making sure it doesn't have some impact on the quality metrics with the control panel. Okay, so I'm going to ask Chuck if he can deploy. Yeah, so as I said, keep in mind this is an audition video. We went to training. This just kind of gives you a feel for the excitement and some of the stuff that's going on within the team. And in the next PMR as well, we'll show pieces of the Mojo operational control system.
In most days, you will communicate with your supervisor by text or phone. Your supervisor is there to discuss with you your job performance, how you're doing your interviews, and also to discuss with you your available time. Don't forget to plan up to 5 days in advance. They will also address any concerns, any incidents, any accidents, any threats. Let him or her know whether you need any supplies or any help, okay? Questions so far? Yes, ma'am.
What if someone complains to the Census Bureau about enumerators visiting?
Well, sometimes we do get complaints, and it's your supervisor's job to relay any relevant concern or complaints to you and to discuss with you whether you need to change something you're doing or not. You remember your training video about climbing fences, peeking in windows, loud knocking, right? Great. Now, you use your smartphone to conduct interviews. It tells your supervisor if you're working that day by streaming data directly to their computer. These data are then used to fill in reports, whether you picked up your cases for the day or if you were at the right locations for your interviews. These data then are compared across all enumerators to identify those who are falling behind and those surging ahead.
So it's kind of like a competition?
No, not quite. Your supervisor gets ongoing reports about the completeness of your cases, their quality, and other measures. And remember, we never falsify data. It is grounds for immediate termination. The census depends on our integrity, and it all starts with you, okay? Now let's all review the interviewing rules.
So that was just one quick module out of one of the key core videos. This was their audition. So we were able to show some of this to the field staff as well last week. And field was really engaged at the fact that this is going to be multimedia. So a lot of this will be videos that we're beginning to film next week outside of the Census Bureau, as well as you'll have some that look like they're being done in a classroom. So we're doing a large variety of multimedia content. So very much like the online training we take here. Questions?
Thanks, Stephanie. Let's open it up for discussion. Trish?
Yes, I have a question for Melissa. You mentioned that the 2015 administrative records will not include the most current, was it the most current tax records? Is that a function of April 1st or something else?
Yes, so traditionally we receive full sets of administrative records from IRS, probably about June timeframe.
I can take this one.
Okay.
Okay. As coincidence would have it, our busy time, April 1st, is also the IRS's busy time, April 15th. In the past, we've received deliveries from the IRS in May, and that will be the case this year. But we are negotiating with the IRS to receive deliveries a little bit early on. With that said, the negotiations have just started, but we're hopeful that for the 2016 test, we'll be able to receive those files early and then remove those vacant, deletes, occupied units prior to non-response follow-up, which typically starts mid-May for us.
Ty?
Yeah, I've got to trying to catch up here with a bunch of different things we talked about. Thank you, number one. First thing, the evaluation, I think, Melissa, the evaluation follow-up that you talked about.
Yeah.
I was struck by the goal of determining the best roster. And I was just curious if you've got a methodology for figuring that out yet.
So same as, it's basically a similar approach that we did in the coverage measurement operations, CCM. out of 2010. So we're taking a lot of those questions, which try to get at, did people move in, did people move out, did we miss anybody? So it's just, re-asking the same questions in different ways in order to try to, in different ways, elicit, any more information from who could have been here on this time. And then we use the answers to those questions to determine who was actually here on April 1, who was here after April 1 or before. So it's really just asking more detailed questions in different ways to try to get the most information.
And you'll be relying on the e-sample response as opposed to doing some sort of manipulation between the two. I mean, because you'll have your own errors in that, but that's just what you're going to work with, right?
Yeah, so it's an independent interview, and we won't be able to measure the quality of that. But we, based on previous research that we've done, the results that come out of an intensive interview, like the PI, the person interview, are somewhat better.
Awesome. I'm trying to read my notes here. I think this is out of order, but the SIMX, partly because I don't understand it all, and don't try to make me understand. That's too high a bar here to shoot for. But would the parameters that you have control over, or the scenarios that you've already identified, is it going to let you play with some of the variables close to how enumerators might actually be gaming the system, specifically some of the stuff we were talking about earlier this morning? For example, the idea of, I know we're not trying to manage based on contact attempts, but is that kind of thing you going to be able to play with that? Is that in the scenarios that you got?
It is in the scenarios. So we played with a lot of the possibilities. So a lot of what Field came up with were core things that go on every day. A dog bite, wrecked my car, how do I do that? But there's also key things that the Field wanted worked in. There's core pieces in Mojo that we have GPS coordinates, there's other things. How do we begin to work with people gaming the system? How do we begin to work with the attempts and sending people back? So all of those scenarios are covered in the simulation. They will be in the later day simulations when the West Coast is up, so that there's more participation from everyone in the country. Yes.
Thank you. And I think this is related. Somewhere, I think Melissa was talking about the contact. You talked about the getting away from contact-based management and more using other variables to manage. Is it going to be case specific? The stop rule. So the stop rule is going to be case specific?
We're going to be measuring them at the block group level. So we're going to be looking at the data from the block group level. We're going to be looking at all the self-responses we would have gotten to date, all the non-responses, any information we have from administrative records, understanding what's missing and what else we might need to get based on comparing it to benchmark data sets like the ACS and maybe the previous census. And looking at that at the block group level to say, okay, I think we have enough information here. And so it's not that we're not managing by contact attempts, that we're still taking that into account, but we're also adding in, looking at the data real time to say, hey, these are how many contact attempts, even though we didn't get to the 3 that we said we would max out at, we have enough information here, so maybe we can stop. So it's a duality of both of them.
So you'll be using the information, but the decision rule on stopping is going to be applied at the block level as opposed to the case
block group
specific.
level
Block
in 2015.
Right. Thank you.
Rocket sounds great, Mojo sounds great, and I'm sure you're working very closely with the Compass team. And so, it sounds great, what you're doing in conjunction with technically how the operations of 2014 test, were successful. So I guess, my question is less technical, but more like from the viewpoint of the enumerators walking around. It seems like it's going to be a lonely job. So much is automated, and which is the right way to go, of course. But and then something Tim said earlier about walking down that lonely road, driving down that lonely road in Montana or other areas. What do you think about that, I guess?
So this has come up and been an ongoing thought among the team. Australia also mentioned it to us when they were here, that automation is tremendous. We all need to move in that direction. But how do you help the team feel like they're still part of a team? So part of what we're doing is, even though they won't have the ability, we don't really want them at McDonald's every morning, but they do have the ability to FaceTime on the devices. So we've been talking a lot about how to use FaceTime and texting, as well as phone calls, to feel like they have that ability to communicate as a team. Some of the other things that Field has actually brought to light that they feel would help in this manner is working with these little reports, because some of the things that we've heard dynamically is, I thought I was doing a really good job till somebody showed me where I compared with other groups. And trust me, Field's not competitive at all. But it's funny, the minute that they see that they're not number 1 or number 2 in the list, it's like, well, I have to get to 1 or 2, and how do I get there? And so what we heard a lot in working with them, especially in the New York and Denver trips, is we want you guys to provide us something where we know from our devices. So when we pick up our device, we know where we rank in the group in Maricopa, because we want to strive to be number 1 or number 2. So how do I get there? And so what we've had a lot of conversations about is, how do you have a FaceTime or a group conversation via the device? Because what we were told is, for every hour we bring all those people together, like in a McDonald's. So if we just allow the LSOs to meet with their enumerator once, it's $87 million for that hour. That's a lot. So technology is bringing us the ability via the tablets and via the handheld that we're giving them to do the FaceTime, to do the texting, and to see those reports. And what they told us is, it's not uncommon to what they're doing now in their work from home environment. They're still communicating on how do we get to be number 1. But to us, that's going to be something we're really going to watch in the 2015 test. And we're talking to other people about, how do you get that still, that working as a team, where they don't feel like they're out there on their own. And does anybody really care what I'm doing day to day? And that's what we don't want them to feel, as though they're out there all alone on the road by themselves. So we're looking into the technology to really segue us into that. FaceTime is the big thing everybody keeps talking about.
You mentioned 6 external systems, and you used the word files, which kind of piqued my interest, because that sounds kind of old-fashioned. What are the external systems? And I don't know if Compass is considered one of them or not.
It is. There are 6. There's DAPS, there's Geo passing shape files, there is the Compass, Geo, DAPS, who else am I missing? Geo, DAPS. There's 6 total. The stopping rules, the stuff coming in from UCRM. So in the short term, we are doing files. Come 2016 and the onboarding of Maestro, or MOX, we're already working with that team to accept canonical-based formats, XML with a defined XSD. And so we're already well on our way to doing that. In the 2015 test, with this quick inception of Rocket, we couldn't, RTOCS is being, that might not be much longer as a system. We don't want to turn everything on its ear in 2015. We really want to move towards the enterprise SEDCAP solution, and that being the MOX interfaces. So that's already been scheduled out for us through SEDCAP. Starting in the end of 2014, we'll begin that work, but we're already working with Maestro on that. And some of the core engineers that we're working on MOX are the core engineers working on Rocket and Mojo. So there's already that cross-pollination between the two and what we need to set up in order to deliver. So it's a short-term, one-time shot. So with the inception of Rocket, we didn't turn everything on its ear.
Any others? So we have a break scheduled, and we have to reset the front table. So rather than taking a full break, why don't we just take a few minutes if people want to cut out for a minute or check their iPhones or whatever. Totally understandable. Let's bring the next team up for the final presentation today, and thank you all for a good discussion so far this afternoon.